So, it'll be March by the time you see this, so you might be thinking, isn't it a little too late to be talking about coolest things about 2022 when we're already a fourth into 2023? Well, this is February for me, so it's not that soon on my end of it. Also, I've already done a video on the top 10 games that I played in 2022. And just like with this video, really, it's not stuff that came out in 2022. Even less so than games. When it comes to what I'll be talking about, just stuff I experienced in 2022. Because that's just how I feel doing these things. It's how I like doing it. If you're hearing an outside noise, there's this new invention. You may want to look into it. It is called laundry. And you know, before, back when I was attempting to use Patreon for this kind of stuff, I would have cared way too much about those background sounds, despite people telling me they didn't even notice a lot of that stuff, which I'm surprised. That radiator in my apartment is so super loud. I have a hard time believing you guys tuned that out. But now that all funding is just going to be based on book sales, manuscripts, and stuff like that, I really did not like running Patreon. I felt bad even when I was uploading every month, being like, oh man, now I have to overly promote it, and that's not my thing. I really am a set it and forget it type of guy. Yeah, the most you're going to get is when I remember at the end to be like, oh yeah, I sell manuscripts, go click there. Or in the beginning where I'm like, hey, I sell manuscripts, you can get them. Also, because I don't care enough anymore, yeah, these are going to be way more laid back in the future. I just like doing it that way. So which means I don't have a script. I'm just going to go through my phone and talk about some stuff. Let's get something out of the way first. Because I was just talking about books, let's do books first and admit I won't really be talking about books. Liar! 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 If you check out my Goodreads, I do a reading challenge every single year, and I've actually done it correctly. Yeah, done it correctly, how they pronounce it. But if you check out my reading challenge for 2022, like nearly half of them, like over half of what I read was comics, which is fine. But about half of the comics I read, or maybe more so than that, was me catching up on Pokemon Adventures. I mentioned it in the video from last year that I had started reading it and I wasn't going to talk about them until I had really gone through the 10 collector set volumes that they released. And I was going to grab them, but they're actually behind some of the other stuff because they're taller, so I'm not going to do that. Here's a JPEG. Wow, it's like it's right here in the room with me. And I really like Pokemon Adventures, don't get me wrong. But it meant that the amount of books that I read last year that were really great and really super worth talking about is really low, unfortunately. Because I'm not just going to necessarily pick out certain volumes of Pokemon Adventures. I can for the ones I like the most. I'm still a big sucker on the Ruby and Sapphire and also now the Emerald chapters. Gen 3 just means that much to me, I guess. I really like it. I also like the Hoenn episodes of the show, if I remember correctly. I guess I just like Hoenn a lot. Because as much as I do like, you know, Gen 2 and Gen 5, nothing has clicked with me, franchise-wise, as much as Gen 3 did. Because even I think that's a weird coincidence that my favorite of the Adventures stuff was Gen 3. I just like Ruby and Sapphire's characters more, and I won't lie, apparently Americans aren't that big on the character Emerald. They're more like, man, why wasn't Wally the new character? I think the way they handled Wally in Ruby and Sapphire was good for what he is. He's just a rival character. I know Silver got some great expansions in the Pokemon Adventures stuff and was essentially one of the main characters. I won't deny that. But I like Emerald's story, and I like how weird and out of the box that was. I really like the Emerald chapters, actually. If I had to say what my favorite ones are, yeah, it's the Ruby stuff, the Sapphire stuff, and the Emerald stuff. Other than that, I guess some of the Gold and Silver stuff was pretty good. I like the Red and Green chapters too, but not as much as the gold and silver stuff. The Fire Red and Leaf Green felt more like a nice little interlude that was going to connect future stuff. So I don't know how I would rank them necessarily, because I've only made it as far as Emerald. But yeah, I would love to read the Diamond and Pearl stuff though, but they didn't come out with these colorful collector set stuff. So I don't know when I'm going to get around to it, because they will now look weird on the shelf. I'm just going to wait and see if there's a collector's edition coming. Part of me doubts it, because I know it was for the anniversary, but part of me really wants it. Other than that, I read a... Hold on, I'll grab this one. I read this. It's called Strange Maine. It's a collection of blog posts from a blogger about the weird stuff that happens in the state. And yeah, I always like stuff like this. Sometimes it's ghost stories, which, I'll be real, I've mentioned before, not a believer, but I find this stuff fascinating. And sometimes I read a story where it's like, okay, I felt like you gave me all the facts and I still don't know what went on. I may not be a believer, but I'm open-minded enough, you know? I do believe there is such a thing as some unexplained stuff, if that makes any sense, and so I'm fascinated by that. There's not so much of that in this. This is more just actual oddities, like there's a guy who sells like 1 billion hubcaps. He just has them in a collection. That was a fun read. Yeah, I don't know if the blog is still open. If it is, check it out, but this publication is good. It was just a fun read. And then the only other comic I can talk about is I finally read The Dark Knight Returns.
You don't get it, son. This isn't a trash heap. It's an operating table.
You know, one of those quintessential Batman stories. And I've only read a couple of those. I've read The Long Halloween. I don't know if some of you would count it as this, but I've read the Black Label Joker comic. I like that one quite a bit. I'm super behind on my DC stuff. Even though I prefer them, to just straight up saying it, I don't read a lot of mainstream comics because it always feels like I have not done the homework because they have to go decades back. I know, DC likes rebooting all the time. Some fans don't like that. I do feel like I understand where they're coming from because it's like, oh man, maybe let's not lock everybody out of the continuity. You know, there's a reason why I like a lot of the DC animated stuff. And even that stuff are in the same continuity, so, oh whoops, I picked the wrong one and now I have no idea what's going on. And why when I do eventually tackle Disney stuff, or the Marvel stuff for Disney, I'm going to have to start from the very beginning, even though by my own rules, some of that stuff doesn't count. Like Iron Man 1 does not count. It was not actually made by Disney. That was before the buyout and everything, so... But Dark Knight Returns, I don't know if I have anything interesting to add to the conversation. I loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5. I find that take on Batman is really intriguing. It really looks at more of a psychoanalytical study of, hey, this guy's probably nuts. It's probably something deranged and psychotic about him. And I do like how it's studied into that. His own obsession with dealing with criminals. I really like how they handle the Joker. It's really creepy in a lot of ways. And oh god, is it Carrie Kelly? I think her name is Carrie Kelly. That Robin, I see why she's one of everyone's favorite Robins. Wow. I also love when people attempt to read that and try to figure out Frank Miller's political sides. Some people say it's like very far right wing, and it's like, and you can debunk that by showing any panel where actual real world Republican President Ronald Reagan shows up, because he is only ever painted as a self-serving moron. It's like hard to call him far right when he has really harsh criticisms of the far right. And that's because I think what people don't understand, and again, maybe I'm just grasping at straws here, I think just looking at this, and maybe his politics have changed since then, I don't know, I don't bother to look into it. I think Frank Miller is incredibly apolitical. I think people are looking at him and being like, well, Alan Moore is also a great comics man, and he's super political, and they're right. Alan Moore was incredibly political. Frank Miller wasn't. And, I mean, yes, apolitics is still a branch of politics, the same way atheism is still technically a religion. Like, again, we're talking technicalities, but yes. And I think it's just because he does not swing equally for one side or the other. that people get kind of confused by it or want to try to find the deeper meaning of it, especially on Twitter, where everything has to be a black and white conversation, where I'm obviously the winner, shut up. It's so fascinating to see that, because last year, Batman got a lot of criticisms himself from that crowd being... just a lot of bad takes on Twitter, especially involving comics. And look, I have my own hot opinions on comics. Like I just said, I don't read mainstream comics because I feel too locked out. I'm not an idiot about it. But Dark Knight Returns, again, that is the most I have. My biggest add to the conversation is that I think people on Twitter are reading the wrong version of that comic. It's the one in their head. I think it's still a very intriguing, very violent, and incredibly well shot comic, if that makes any sense. The way that the panels go, it's genuinely unlike anything I've ever read. And I'm aware this is basically where Frank Miller peaked, and everything after this is either or hot garbage. So I'm so glad I read his best comic, because his best comic is a masterpiece. Okay, let's by the way, this is going to be probably a bit longer, and my camera battery is not the kindest to me. There's going to be a cut at some point, because I'll be filming a different day. If I'm still wearing the same shirt, like I said, laundry's been invented, so don't worry, I didn't reuse it. But also, I'll probably change the camera angle. My books are behind the camera right now, so I'll probably stand there. So you can judge me for the books I'll have on display. I like filming live action, so I don't have to find too much B-reel to talk over. But then I forget, sometimes I space out or I have a drink, and so much editing I have to do to cut all that out. Let's talk TV shows real quick. Most of the TV shows... no, you know what? Forget I said that. Let's talk movies. So, movies are definitely an interesting thing. I don't go to the theater too much to watch movies. I usually wait for them to hit streaming, or in all honesty with me, I still buy physical, so I will wait to get a Blu-ray. You know, I'm just that kind of person. That said, I did actually go to the theaters, shockingly, a lot last year. I guess just because I needed to go. In fact, I even went to the movie theaters pretty recently, back in January, and I think I'm going to have to talk about that one too. But basically, so last year I did a video about how I saw a bunch of animated short films, the Oscar-nominated ones, and I gave my thoughts, and I said which one would win, and I hedged some bets, including one where I said, I hope this one doesn't win, but I think it's gonna. That was the one that was right. Beastia was not my favorite one, but Beastia should have won, just saying. But something I saw a commercial for, well, a trailer, sorry, that's what trailers are, they're commercials, was, I got a trailer for Marcel the Shell with Shoes On.
Tell me about what's life like.
It's pretty much common knowledge that it takes at least 20 shells to have a community.
And funny, speaking of Oscars, it's been nominated for Best Animated Film, which is... Apparently it's eligible because there is a percentage you're allowed. And that or it wasn't. I don't keep up with the Oscars that much. Not even for animated films or animated shorts, because I just don't find it as exciting. Usually being able to guess the winner for animated film way too easy. But Marcel caught my interest, and usually with trailers, it didn't win the year at the other, because I don't see movies in theaters that much. I'm like, oh, that's a trailer. That's cool. Or if it was a bad one, maybe I kind of remember it. But quite generally, when I go to a movie, if someone asks me like what I got trailers for, my instant reaction is, okay, give me a minute, I'll have to remember, because I usually instantly forget trailers. But I really remembered Marcel. And so when Marcel came to that same theater, I was like, oh my gosh, Marcel the Shell. I really want to see this. And Marcel the Shell is fantastic. It's strange. In some ways, it's a found footage film, because it is told mostly through the perspective of a guy filming it. In fact, I think it's entirely told that way. But again, it's a partially animated film, because you have Marcel himself and his grandmother and the rest of his family, all that stuff. it's a really incredibly heart-tugging and heartwarming movie. It is strange how it is a movie for children, because it's pretty emotionally mature, which, not that kids can't handle it, I'm just saying I'm really not used to that. When I dip my toes into, well, I'm an animation fan, let's see what is there for animation, and a lot of it's family animation, and some of it is just not up to snuff. Just genuinely. So, seeing what, and I don't watch the live action family friendly stuff, I just don't. I'm only doing it to support animation, which I wish we had more adult stuff, but that's a different conversation, isn't it, than why I liked Marcel the Shell. I guess you can just read my Letterboxd review, because I really got into it there, and it's a very long review, which shows how much I really liked the film. I love its artistic style, I love the things it's saying, I love the way it's presenting itself, and I love that we have a film that actually understands how the internet works. A lot of movies and games and shows that attempts to emulate internet culture really don't know what they're talking about. The ones that get it the best are the ones that just know what a meme is, and so they just put memes in there. So they're not even talking about the internet, they're just putting in some memes. And even then, people get annoyed by that too, and why wouldn't they? Sometimes memes are stupid. It's such a well put together film, it's very charming. And if I'm not mistaken, and it is nominated for Best Animated Feature Film, I totally would be fine with it winning it, even though a lot of it is live action. It is a fantastic movie, and it's very, very well told. The A24 shop, which I found out the only way to buy it on 4K, seems a little obtuse, but I hope I can figure it out, because I would love this film on a 4K Blu-ray. I really want to watch this again someday. And you know what, let's just go to the film I actually saw the next time I went to that theater. Dragon Ball Super Superhero.
An old-fashioned superhero.
This guy seems to learn his opponent's techniques as he fights.
Now, I can't show too many clips because I know that Toei gets Toei company what owned the Dragon Balls gets a little mad when there's too much footage, and you know what? Fine. I don't love it, but fine. Dragon Ball Super Superhero, I think genuinely is the best Dragon Ball movie. I have a fondness for the Path of Power, as I half joked about in my video from last year. But yeah, I'm super fond of Path of Power. I think it is pure distilled original Dragon Ball in a fun little package with only a few things updated with gorgeous animation. But if I had to pick a best Dragon Ball film, as in the Dragon Ball film to show anybody, I think it is Super Superhero, because it is not afraid to say, hey, our franchise has been going on for decades. Even long-time comers are probably pretty confused. Let's just have a slightly awkward, but very needed opening narration that recaps everything Dragon Ball up to this point. And it actually works really well. It's super well animated. I mean, that stuff is hand-drawn. Then you get to the CGI stuff. But the CGI stuff still looks really good. There's a couple of shots with Goku, where Goku looks a little too well defined. His shirt has too many fabric lines, and his muscles have too many muscle textures. But that's about it. And Goku's in this for maybe 4 minutes. All his scenes combined. So that's fine. It's the content of the movie that's better. And there's some incredibly smart character stuff. I mean, you guys know about the new transformations now by this point, I would assume. They're handled really well. Some people think Gohan stuff comes out of nowhere. I'm going to be honest with you. I mentioned I'm not a fan of the Android Saga when I rewatched it. I think its pacing is bad. I think its hacky-sacking of who's important and who's more powerful gets really annoying. I don't think the original dub, at least, and the original way they paced it out, does not hold up unless the first time you experienced it was when you were really young and you really got attached to Gohan. And I really think, because, I mean, from what I understand, even in Japan, apparently, Cell is not the most popular villain. So yeah, Americans who, as kids, watched Dragon Ball Z and got attached to Gohan liked that arc more than the Japanese audience who, as a kid, watched Kid Goku. And were probably parents by the time of Gohan's journey. And maybe they didn't connect as much. Or maybe they weren't parents, they were just adults. So, I don't know. I don't like the Cell, the Android stuff very much, even though I like Cell as a villain conceptually. So hearing people say, I want Gohan to be a fighter again, it's like, when I watched the Frieza stuff, which I love the Frieza stuff actually, my instant reaction to Gohan was, I get this character. He is the strongest one if he is allowed to let loose. But the thing holding him back is that he does not want to be a fighter. He never wanted to be a fighter. He had the heart of a hero, and so he could step up if he needed to. But this kid is not a fighter. He's a hero. And so him becoming a family man with a full-time job, that fits his long-term character way more than just him being the arrogant fighter who took down Cell. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of arguments for this one, but I stand by that. And so the way Superhero handles it, where it does kind of come to that exact same conclusion. There's nothing wrong with Gohan spending time with his family and being a dad and a scholar, but still being strong enough that if he's the one they need to call, they can call him. I think that's great. And I think it serves everybody, because the people who still need Gohan to be a fighter still have that. And the people like me, because there's more people like me than just me, who are fine with Gohan moving on. We get that too. We're still in the movie section, but I need to talk about the fact I did finish watching the original dub run of Dragon Ball. And I'm sorry, I still love the Buu Saga. Like, that was, of all things, my introduction to Dragon Ball Z. I got the Buu Saga, and then immediately after, my Toonami was like, hey, guess what, kids? We'll be airing original Dragon Balls soon. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, oh, they made a prequel. Because, you know, when I was a kid, the Star Wars prequels were a thing, so I thought it was normal for the stuff that happened first to be made after. Little did I know, no, Dragon Ball did come first. And so yeah, and I always liked original Dragon Ball more than Z, and no, not because of the Android stuff. I just like original Dragon Ball more. I got my complaints. I think the Red Ribbon Army saga goes on for way too long. It overstays its welcome. But there's a lot I like about Buu. It keeps the more edgy violence that Z had, but it really wanted to go back to those mystical, adventurous roots of original Dragon Ball. I mean, it's a pink blob guy based off of a type of genie. I mean, it's Ma-Jin, evil genie, evil Jin, evil genie. I really like Babidi for all those reasons. Having Dabura, the king of all demons, that is so closer to original Dragon Ball than Z. Which is why I get why people who love Z think Buu is stupid. Also because, I mean, it's got the same pacing and early dubism problems. Although to be said, the early dub was picking up a bit more stride, more like Piccolo's voice sounding a little bit less gruff and silly. Although, to be said, the gruff and silly Piccolo voice works for early Dragon Ball, where he's evil King Piccolo. All of them! I agree with with Lenny Pator. That is one of the best line reads ever in all of dub history, and you cannot convince me otherwise. But yeah, no, I really like the Buu stuff, and also because I am the guy who thinks Gohan's better as a hero and a scholar, maybe not a fighter, but a hero and a scholar. Seeing him have a day-to-day life with like a Batman kind of angle where he's the great Saiyaman, it's like, I love that stuff. I think it's so silly and so Dragon Ball, and it still fits. Because, yeah, he's not a fighter. I don't see him as, you know, well, I guess I should explain this a bit better, because when I say fighter, I don't mean he hates punching guys. Obviously, because if he hated fighting at all, he wouldn't have dressed up as Saiyaman. I mean a fighter the same way Goku and Vegeta are, or even Krillin, or even Piccolo, where they actually really are looking for that next challenge. Gohan's never been that. He only puts up the dukes when he feels he has to. And so in a world where his father's gone, and Vegeta and Piccolo and Krillin aren't helping out the city for like these person actors and everything, that feels like a Gohan thing. It's like, hey, no one's helping stop these guys. I should stop these guys. I love that, actually. And the budding romance he has with Fidel is easily the best love interest writing Dragon Ball ever got. Like, sure, I'm a sucker for Kid Goku and, like, Kid Chi-Chi for the obvious reasons, but I love Videl and Gohan. They are the best, they're the best love story Dragon Ball ever had. And also, as an animation fan, I love how many corners they got. They just reuse Nappa's character design. Commander Red shows up. So, like, as a movie director, because we had the model laying around, I remember straight up saying, after some of those guys showed up, I remember saying, if a recolor of Mercenary Tao shows up, this is the best story Dragon Ball ever had. And then we get to the next World Martial Arts tournaments, and there in the background was a recolored Mercenary Tao. That's the best arc ever in Dragon Ball. Yeah, like, you know, it's up there with, like, my top 5, top 4 maybe. Yeah, the Frieza arc goes in there. I won't lie. I think the Frieza arc is fantastic. And the World Tournament where they fought against the Crane School, you know, our true introduction to Tien Shinhan. Really love that arc. And the ending arc for original Dragon Ball, Goku versus Piccolo Jr., which, oh my god, that is the next DLC for Kakarot, and I cannot wait. The Bardock DLC was fine. I've already played it. It's fine. I really cannot wait until that one. Oh. Let's talk quickly about Shrek Forever After.
You know what the best part of today was? I got the chance to fall in love with you all over again.
So I hadn't seen, I hadn't seen it for the first time last year. I'd seen it previously. I thought it was pretty good when I saw it. That was on the cusp of the reevaluation of, wow, Shrek Forever After, Shrek Forever After is actually pretty good. We were, like, way too mean on this movie that probably a lot of people hadn't even seen before. Like, I know the internet. But rewatching it last year, I really connected to it more. The way I put it on Letterboxd, so sorry to reuse a Letterboxd review, the way I feel about it is that what makes Shrek 1 and 2 fantastic films is that they have a great sense of comedy, a great sense of world, a great premise, and there's these really surprisingly beautiful emotional moments. Shrek Forever After is weird in that it nails that last one, maybe even better than the other ones did. But where it doesn't stick the landing entirely is the comedy. I think the comedy in the first half of the movie has some really funny moments, but a lot of the comedy in the second half blows. It's just not very funny, or funny at all. There's a couple things that work really well, like I love that the Pied Piper's enchanted number is just a flute version of Shaker Groove thing.
Woo, yeah! Click is bringing the heat out the kitchen. Yeah!
Oh no!
Like, that's funny. That's incredibly funny. But I love the emotional moments. I love Shrek and Fiona rekindling their romance. I like the beginning of Shrek having a normal, great, fulfilling life, and how, even when that happens, making that your mundane, everyday, to-day life can still get nerve-wracking. It's certainly a thing that we... Shrek is very good at giving these emotional things that we don't necessarily think about too much, and that's a great one, how you can have the best life. The one you should always be grateful for. But like anything else, it can still grind you down sometimes. Like, Shrek does the wrong thing in the beginning, obviously, but you see where he's coming from. And I remember seeing some people think, before this movie got reevaluated, thinking Shrek was awful and ungrateful for all that. And the funny thing is now, people who have rewatched it since, some of them think Fiona is the ungrateful one because she's not paying attention to her husband's needs. Which is a fun little take, how it's been completely reversed now. It went from, wow, Shrek should be grateful that he has a perfect life, to, hey, Shrek's life may be perfect, but he's clearly coming down with someone not feeling great. Why is no one helping him out? But yeah, the action set pieces are great. And last year was when I decided, yeah, this is not like the 4th best Shrek movie. This does not beat. This is not worse than that Puss in Boots movie that was still pretty good. It's definitely in the top 3. It's the 3rd best Shrek movie. But then, ever since this January, it is no longer the top 3 best Shrek movies because it got beat out by the other Puss in Boots movie.
Hey, you want to see something cool?
Who is your favorite fearless hero? Who is your favorite fearless hero?
Yeah, I watched the Puss in Boots The Last Wish, which came out last year, but I only watched it in January. I actually got to go to a movie theater with a friend of mine. I needed a way to get there. And wow, yeah, the comedy never lets down, unlike in Shrek Forever After. It goes some places that I am so glad that it's going. And like classic Shrek, it's edgy. There's blood in this movie. There's swearing in this movie. And I know I sound like a teenager, but I've missed edgy animated movies like this, but only ones that know what they're doing. Like, stupid edgy only gets you so far. Clever edgy can be something great, and I love what Puss in Boots The Last Wish does. Its cast of villains are great and mostly fleshed out, except for one exception who they do that on purpose. And the way they do that on purpose is great! I would talk about it more, but it's a newer movie, and I know, weirdly, the anti-spoiler culture people have vanished. A lot of people are admitting about how great the end of the movie is, here's how it all goes out. I thought spoilers were a no-no on the internet. Where'd you go? I'm sure they'll come back when that new Ant-Man movie comes out. Let's not figure out that Ant-Man definitely wins in the end. But, oh my god, Puss in Boots is so good. Like Marcel, I am buying this on 4K Blu-ray. Not just to have a complete Shrek collection. This movie is just so good, I need to see it like multiple times in the future. And in highest quality format. The movie is so good. Like, if you have held off yet, like if you're that person who still left Shrek because the third was an atrocious train wreck, I actually can't blame you, because the franchise picked up after that, but Shrek 3 was such an admittance of defeat. I wouldn't blame anybody still saying, no, Shrek gave up, why should I keep going? Believe it or not, Shrek only gave up once. They tried ever since then. And even the first Puss in Boots movie, which is not entirely anything to write home about, because it's technically the second worst Shrek movie, is still a fun ride for what it is. It's just The Last Wish. It is either my third favorite Shrek film or my second. I know, so you're like, oh wow. Well, obviously, Shrek 2 is your number 1. Believe it or not, I'm super fond of Shrek 1. Shrek 1 is my favorite Shrek film. So, I don't know if Last Wish is better or almost as good as Shrek 2, and I mean that. So if you have not seen The Last Wish, you can forget about Forever After. I think that movie's great and underrated, but you can skip it if you want. You'd be missing out if you missed The Last Wish. It is truly that good. I just got the notification that the battery is dying. Yeah, forget it. Well, I'll just come back to this later. So big jump cut there because the battery started to die. And this is the same day, in fact, though. I'm still going to record over, like, 2 days, but I am happy that I decided to take a break because I had to rethink which one I was going to talk about next. Because the order I was going to go in I don't think works as well as I would like it to. And we're going to finish movies, though. Remember a bit ago, I mentioned that I do watch some of the DC animated stuff, back when I was talking about The Dark Knight Returns. And ever since getting HBO Max, I occasionally go and watch more of them. It's actually the most I've watched these for a while, because they've never been so amazingly good that I had to track down a Blu-ray or anything, but they were things I would pop on Netflix if they were on Netflix, so them being right there on HBO Max, great, I can go check them out. And a fantastic one. Easily one of the best things ever that they did. Is only about 12 minutes long or less. Maybe it's 5 or 6. Because it was in a compendium called DC Animated Showcase. And the showcase I'm talking about is the Blue Beetle one.
You're not going anywhere, octomorons. Blue Beetle! Sorry, Squid Gang.
That diamond's bigger than your head and has a lot more brains.
So Blue Beetle is barely in this one when it comes to importance. This is actually, the main character is effectively the Question. And the Question gets to go around being this objectivist, this truismist, this stuff that sounds good on paper, but is a bit odd. And from what I understood about what some people were saying online, it's apparently a joke over either Steve Ditko or one of the, like, big original comic names. It might even be the aforementioned Alan Moore, and how they were a huge objectivists and moralists, and so the Question is effectively making fun of them. Making fun of that, and you know what? It does it really well. I love the Question in this so much. Blue Beetle's interesting because I know that there's been several Blue Beetles. It's you know, one of those legacy characters, and the legacy characters always, almost always anyway, tend to be those obscure characters. Like people like Spider-Man. You know, there's been more than one. You've got Miles Morales and you got Peter Parker. And then you gotta go to the alternate universes to get to the other ones, which technically was also Miles Morales until they realized he was like the one good character people liked from alternate universe Marvel. But then you get characters like Blue Beetle, or to go back to Marvel, Fool Killer. Ever hear of Fool Killer? There's been like 5 of them. You've heard of none of them. And so, I'm only familiar with the Blue Beetle who was in the Batman Brave and the Bold, Jamie something, or Jaime something, and he was cool. I was never the biggest fan of Batman the Brave and the Bold, but yet I watched it hypocritically, and now that I'm older, I get more of what it's doing, and I remember thinking Blue Beetle was one of the better characters that Batman Brave and the Bold introduced me to. Doesn't matter though, this is a different Blue Beetle. The animation, they're making fun of like the Fleischer era Superman stuff, and definitely some early Hanna-Barbera stuff, and like, it's bad, it's choppy. Sometimes Blue Beetle's mouth is just next to his face. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen, just in general. It's one of the best things ever made. If you have an HBO Max and you are cautious about which DC animated movies you want to see because you've heard some pretty bad things, I'm going to say you've probably heard those takes from YouTube. And I hate to break it to you, sometimes YouTubers are meaner than they actually think because they're still convinced this gets them clicks. And we're starting to see people finally wake up for that realization of, oh, maybe they're just clicking on it because I'm talking about a DC thing or a Disney thing and those are popular. The whole angry equaled view count thing is kind of bunk. It's not entirely true. Some people make that their bread and butter, but genuinely, it doesn't seem to be true. Check out my own videos. There's only a handful where I'm actually negative, and they don't seem to perform any better than my positive ones. In fact, my positive ones, a lot of my most positive ones are by best performing view count wise, and or my best performing likes ratio or wise. So, if that crowd convinced you, oh, the DC anime movies are bad, no. Some of them sure are. I wasn't a big fan of The Long Halloween Part 2, for example, but most of them have been at least serviceable, which is a decent enough time if you have nothing else to watch. But if you're going to watch one, you need to see that Blue Beetle one. That is stellar. That justifies Warner Brothers Animation Department all by itself. Okay, we've only got a few more things to talk about with movies. I'll do TV shows the next day that I decide to record. So, and we'll do what our original plan was. I talk about singular movies, which was the case until I saw Puss in Boots 2. And then we cut with the movie marathons that I did, because I ended up getting a couple movies from either the same director or in the same studio and watched them. And boy, if you were uninterested in how much I'm talking about animation, I hate to tell you, all of these are animated. Very quickly, I bought most of the Studio Leica films. I'd only seen Coraline and Paranorman, which was enough to make me go, holy crap, these are the best claymation people of all time. Like, Will Vinton was a pretty good guy. I mean, have you seen his Easter special? That's a whopper. Coraline and Paranorman were enough to make me go, these are the best of the best. I would rewatch those last year because I bought the new Shout Factory Blu-rays. And then I watched for the first time the Box Trolls and Kubo and the Two Strings. A lot of animation fans like Kubo and the Two Strings was so overlooked. It's genuinely like maybe the best stop motion film of all time. And my heart still goes out to Coraline. But yeah, this thing is like better than The Nightmare Before Christmas as far as I'm concerned. It's great. It's pretty much a perfect movie. Like, some jokes were kind of meh, and I read some people saying that they predicted the plot of it too much. And if you describe the plot out, I could understand why it would be predictable to some people. The thing about being predictable is that if you can keep your audience engaged the entire time, sometimes they will still not be able to predict what comes next. And that was my case. There was one thing I predicted because it felt like it was actually foreshadowed well enough. A lot of the other, like, I guess you could call them cliches, I didn't really see coming because I was so invested in what I was watching. I loved Kubo. And now I'm done talking about Kubo. Box Trolls is underrated.
Are you sure about this, boss? You know what cheese can do to you?
Unless you are referring to how cheese brings men of respect and power together in brotherhood. No, I do not know what cheese does to me.
That's what I meant then.
Box Trolls is even more cliche, don't get me wrong. There's a lot more stereotypes and archetypes, especially for animated family films. But when you're as funny as Box Trolls is, when you're as stylistic as Box Trolls is, Box Trolls was so much fun. I had a lot of fun watching the Box Trolls for the first time. I really like the villain who has like no redeeming qualities, but is presented in a kind of way where you kind of see how this monster came to be. I really love the social hierarchy, the satire that comes to there in the movie, and oh my god, the art style again. I love how, for once, and it's like Victorian London kind of thing, it kind of feels really true to text, because like the poor unwashed masses look like poor unwashed masses, and the Aristocats look like permed and pecked and pristine, and it's just such a good movie. It's definitely not as good as the rest of their catalog. Like, I said this on Letterboxd too. I would love to be the kind of studio where Box Trolls is my worst film. You put Laika's worst film up against, say, Disney or DreamWorks' worst film, and you will think you found a masterpiece. It's not without its flaws, and it's not without its cliches, but it's a fun time. I was so happy to have watched Box Trolls that I need to talk about it more than Kubo, because I think every other animation fan will tell you how Kubo is this overlooked masterpiece. So someone needs to be online and say, Box Trolls is underrated. And now we're back again, because I ate dinner, and it's notably darker. Oh well, just turn the brightness up on your screen, it's fine. Now, this video has been the hottest of hot messes, and you know what? That's fine. If you have made it this far into the video, go into the comments and just type like you're screaming. Just go, ah! Just there, as long as you want. That's how I know you've made it through the halfway point, the third of a way point. I don't know. But I guess I'll just go back and get to the point I was trying to make before I went to go get dinner, which is one of the other things I technically marathoned was I got my hands on a couple of Ralph Bakshi movies. A lot of them I'd seen before. The only one I hadn't seen before was The Cool and the Crazy, because that got a new DVD release, which is nice. It's like a burn-on-demand one, so it's not the best quality, but neither is the movie. But Shout Factory released Cool World on Blu-ray, and I had to finally pick it up and rewatch it, and yeah, that's still his worst movie. A lot of people, like, unironically think that movie is kind of a lot of fun, and I wish I was in that same boat. I really do. But it also got the Kino Lorber / Scorpion release, Fritz the Cat, and 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat.
Hey, you fucking intellectuals! You think you're so where it's at? Before you fill your minds with to Fritz the Cat.
And I'll be brief with these. I actually like Nine Lives of Fritz the Cat. It feels like an improv show where they just kind of mech stuff up. They mech stuff up. Where they just kept making up random scenarios over and over again. And there's some of a soft spot for improv. I kind of love the uncontrolled chaos that movie is. It's not great, but I enjoy it. I've seen it twice, and I probably will again. It's fun, even if it's not great. Now, Fritz the Cat, the first though. But the thing about Fritz the Cat is that it's one of the most important films in all of animation. You've probably heard of it in an infamous way in that it got an X rating when it first came out. It was the first animated film with an X rating. It's not the first animated film to be geared toward adult audiences. I mean, as Ralph himself put, he didn't invent adult animated features. Animated features way before used to be for all ages, and sometimes that meant even mature ones. And a lot of people blame Disney for the kiddification of animation. I have contested that if you watch the gold and silver eras of Disney, as I put in those reviews, I don't think it's entirely their fault. I think they slipped into it into the dark age, probably just to try to secure some more money, because they weren't doing great financially. But I don't think it was just Disney. That said, Fritz the Cat reminded people that animation can be for just adults sometimes. And that lesson, I feel, gets relearned every once in a while. Like, remember Sausage Party? Like, yeah, remember how this was supposed to bring a new era of R-rated animated movies? And we're still waiting on the next one. I also watched Heavy Metal for the first time last year, and that's a fun movie. I would not recommend it to everybody. I'd only recommend it to people who I'm pretty sure would already like it. Because it's not perfect. It's a lot of weird fun, though. Fritz the Cat, though, is not the movie you probably think it is. It's a social satire, it's artistic, it's gritty, it's violent, yes. It's not perverted entirely. I think there are other Ralph films that are more perverted, Heavy Traffic being one of them. I love Heavy Traffic, but that's the film that I look at and say, that one deserved the X rating. Fritz the Cat, not so much. And I will also say, if you're watching this, and you're roughly college age, young adult, like very early young adult, we're talking like 18, 19, 20, you need to go see this movie now. You will find yourself weirdly resonating with Fritz. There is something so much about how this film captures young adult energy, the angry at everything, the above-it-all attitudes, the ones that, if you are that age and hear me just say that, you think I'm being a piece of shit. You think that that's not you at all. But go watch this film and you will weirdly identify. Because honestly, I did. In many ways, I was not exactly like Fritz the Cat, the character, when I saw that movie. But at that age, I totally felt so many of the things that the character still felt. It is amazing how well this movie understands young adulthood. The anger, the naivete, the genuine intelligence, as well as the sometimes lack of being able to back it up. The impulsiveness, the shrewd behaviors, and the fact that there is a compassion for your fellow man at that point, even if you're really not entirely sure how to do that for the better of the world. It's such an incredible film, and Ralph Bakshi made better films later. I mean, even the Butter Battle book, I think, is better than Fritz the Cat. Fritz the Cat is still one of the most important films in animation, and I think once you become a certain age, it really is mandatory viewing. It's fantastic. I think even if you don't like it, if you're lucky enough to see it at the right age, it might actually shape you as a person, as weird as that sounds. So around the same time I was marathoning both the Ralph Bakshi stuff and the Laika stuff, I had gotten a couple other Blu-rays, and I'm not going to get too into it, but my mother went through some medical stuff, like, last year, and so she had to sometimes just stay on the couch all the time, and I had some movies I had to watch because I bought them. And my mother doesn't always like the movies I like, but sometimes there's an intersection, so I was like, hey, if you're up for it, why don't we watch some of these? And there were 3 that we watched, and I will briefly talk about 2, and then really get on to another one. I rewatched The Last Unicorn, which, because of tiredness, she missed the beginning of, which I think is good, because no joke, she woke up just a few minutes before the where have you been scene. I remember even saying it after, you basically woke up at like the point of the movie where it really actually becomes what that movie is like. I won't talk much about it because I talked about Last Unicorn in last year's video, but I honestly think I like it even better the second time. I think it's becoming one of my favorite fantasy movies, which does not mean it will be on my favorite movies list, because I'm not a big fantasy person, but it is becoming one of my favorite fantasy films. I love the grounded, like, character-driven drama that movie presents, and I do like the elements of fantasy and how they're brought out. Like, it fixes so many of my complaints I usually have for fantasy. We also watched Fern Gully.
I've a basic inclination.
And all I gotta say about Fern Gully is it's good. I think the only reason my mother was willing to watch that one was because we watched Last Unicorn and she was blown away by how good it was. And I was like, I also gotta watch Fern Gully, but I don't think you'll like this one. But she gave that a chance, and she actually did like it, and I like it too, but it's not on the same level. It's Fern Gully. I saved one for last, though, because I had a feeling this would be her favorite, even if, personally, I'm more towards Last Unicorn. For the first time, my mother saw Don Bluth's The Secret of NIMH.
That was close.
What's up there?
The mill. It's falling apart. Hope it stays up there. At least until we're done with the plan.
Plan? What is the plan?
To live without stealing, of course. It's wrong to take electricity from the farmer.
My child, we can no longer live as rats. We know too much.
I have some complaints with Secret of NIMH. I think it does comedy a little bit too much. I think some of the characters who are just meant there for comedy's sake, like the youngest of the children, and the Shrew, I'm not a big fan of. I feel like her character kind of flip-flops on whatever the scene needs her for. I also don't like the villain. I think the villain is not defined enough. And this is a problem I have with a lot of Don Bluth films. In fact, all of it. His comedy sometimes feels ill-fitting. Sometimes things just happen in a scene just because it kind of needs to go that way, and that's as much as thought as went into it. And I think his villains are often underbaked and uninteresting. That said, Don Bluth has given me two movies that, while rough, are two of my favorites. But those are The Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven. So what do I think of The Secret of NIMH? I think everything else about it is masterful. For someone who watches a lot of animated movies from several different countries, I'd be really hard-pressed to describe another animated movie character, at least, who feels like Mrs. Brisby does. She is a distinctive character who I don't think we see very often in movies in general. I do like how little the movie explains its mysticism. I think leaving that up to interpretation is genius. I love the sciencey angles about it. I do love me some Dom DeLuise. Did he have too many funny lines? Yes. Were the funny ones funny? Yeah, they were. I love the overall story. I love the motive. I did read the book a long time ago when I was in school, and I actually didn't like it. And so ever since, because I have seen this movie before, I remember the first time I saw the movie and going, wow, I don't remember why I didn't like that book. But this seems to be a lot better anyway. Secret of NIMH is also one of the most important animated films ever because it came out at this exact right time. Disney was still suffering from their dark age, which, you know, the very director, Don Bluth, worked at Disney at that time, so he knew the criticisms and had his own. And just... It showcased what animated family films should be. And the funny thing is, they still aren't like that. But, you know, times have changed. Family films are different now. But there is something where, even though I have my own criticisms for Secret of NIMH, it's a wonderful template for animated family films that I don't think is followed often enough. Because while there are many I would watch instead of Secret of NIMH, the fact that Secret of NIMH still feels this fresh and this unique, despite how old it's getting now, in some ways is a little embarrassing because they say if you're gonna go for the king, you don't miss, and Secret of NIMH sure did not miss. And you'd think more films would try to be something like Secret of NIMH. Ace just got so much good going for it that even the things I roll my eyes at are so well worth watching the rest of the movie. And now we have one last one that is also weirdly full of complaints. The last studio I marathoned films for was Studio Ghibli, or Ghibli, however you pronounce it. See, Shout Factory worked with G-Kids to release a lot of Blu-ray steelbooks. And honestly, they've been doing this for the last few years. Back to the point. I had barely seen any Studio Ghibli films, you know, unfortunately. Like many, I got on board with Ghibli back when Disney owned the dubbing rights, and so I only had seen some. That said, I'd seen more than some others. I'd seen Spirited Away, I'd seen Kiki's Delivery Service, I'd seen Castle of Cagliostro. That doesn't count, but I'm counting it. I'd seen Porco Rosso, I'd seen Howl's Moving Castle, and I'd seen another one. Oh, Princess Mononoke. Oh, I'm going to get roasted for forgetting that one. And I rewatched all those films, too. Well, not Kiki. I didn't have to buy Kiki again, because Kiki was my favorite. I had it on Blu-ray way before any of these other ones. I have the old Disney Blu-ray. So, yay, I have the awkward John Lasseter interviews I'm never going to watch. The only one I'm behind on is I haven't seen When Marnie Was There. This is the only one I own I have not seen. I watched it like a week later. It's pretty good. It's fine. It's good. Ignore all the background sounds. But now I have almost their entire catalog, and I've seen all these ones. And none of them are stinkers. There were some I had some complaints about, but I enjoyed every movie, which is fascinating. Kiki's Delivery Service, Spirited Away, and The Tale of Princess Kaguya all got 5 stars out of me. I think those films give me something so special and are probably, in terms of what they're going for and what they achieve and what the mass audiences would get into as well, I think those are their top 3 films. And to be honest, the margin for how much better Kaguya is better than the other two, even though they're both 5 stars, is kind of friggin' high. That's one of those movies where, again, I watch a lot of animated films. I go past the mainstream stuff. I've seen the weird shit, the really excellent shit. Kaguya was still one that surprised me. Would you believe the one I would have to pick as my favorite is one that got 3.5 stars out of me?
I've been around planes all my life. Do you know how many I've flown? None! Not a one! Many can fly airplanes, but I design them. I create airplanes, and so can you. An aeronautical engineer! Yes! But remember this, Japanese boy. Airplanes are not tools for war. They're not for making money. Airplanes are beautiful dreams. Engineers turn dreams into reality.
I mentioned this last year with Duck You Sucker. Oh, I don't think I was actually prepared for that movie because I've been non-stop thinking about it since then, and I have to rewatch it soon. Ghibli gave me another one of those experiences. Because half of this movie is an incredible story, told incredibly well, gives me something I didn't know I needed. The other half of this story gives me something unique and beautifully written and incredible, and something I didn't know I needed. But when they intersect, it always felt off to me. However, I respect it for doing that, especially since finding out after it's a biopic. So as much as I originally wanted to go, man, if you had made these 2 separate movies with the same plots, they would have been my 2 favorite Ghibli movies. Instead, my 2 favorite Ghibli movies are stuck in the same movie, and I don't know how well they intersect. But I also, knowing that it's a biopic now, and understanding what sacrifices had to be made artistically to make sure this whole story is told, The Wind Rises is probably going to become my favorite Ghibli film. I've needed to see it again since then. I think I saw it at the wrong time, with the wrong attitude. Because admittedly, I had to pause the movie at one point because I was like applying for some jobs. Jobs I've never heard back from, by the way. Don't you love that that's how the free market works? Every time would shift. I would go, ooh, shouldn't we stick on the other one? Like, do we need more of the romance stuff now? I really kind of want to go back to him learning how to design airplanes because he can't fly them because he has glasses. And then, as the romance stuff would keep going, and then it would then pivot again, I'd go, no, go back to the childhood budding romance that came from a chance encounter and is so beautifully done. I want to go back to that. I don't want to hear about the airplanes right now. So we had a 5-star story and a 5-star story that I do not know how well they intersected, but I think that's just because I wasn't prepared for it. I think if I watch this again, this is like maybe one of those perfect on a second go movies. And, you know, Duckysucker's not the only one, although I still haven't seen it again. Fargo was like that the first time I saw it. I didn't think Fargo was that great. And then ever since the second time I saw it, it's been one of my top 10. There is something about a rewatch or a replay, I've mentioned this before, where you understand way more than you did the first time. Sometimes it can actually mean you have a weaker experience. I understand that. There's been some things I did not like as much the second time. But some stuff you really only appreciate and understand when you have that understanding built in already. Plus, no one can ever take your first experience away from you anyway. So if a second experience isn't as good, oh well. You still have that first one to think back on. But I really do think it's in rewatchability and replayability that things prove their true worth. I work for a gaming outlet now, so I probably shouldn't quote people who work at other gaming outlets. Let's just say someone who is online and maybe works for a company I don't work for recently said, and remember this is in February, that mysteries are interesting in that you can't really do them again because you already know. I personally disagree with that for one thing, because the stories have to foreshadow everything, and sometimes they have to foreshadow it heavily. If you go into a mystery again knowing who the culprit is already, you can look for those little details. And that's one of my favorite things about going back to some things, and why I don't care about spoilers too much. I always like going back and seeing where they were trying to tell me things were going way ahead of time. I like picking up stuff like that. And like I said, sometimes shifts in the emotions or the pacing or even just the actual storytelling or something that you need to prepare for first. When the first go around can't do that, and I think that was my problem with The Wind Rises, because I keep flashing back to everything I loved about that movie, and everything I loved about that movie was every single scene. I think for all the years I was saying Kiki's Delivery Service was Ghibli's best film. I love Spirited Away too, don't get me wrong, but Kiki's Delivery Service I really think was better. I think all those years have been proven wrong. Because A, Kaguya is a better film, and B, The Wind Rises gives me experiences I don't get from anywhere else, not even from Ghibli. And Ghibli's status as one of the best is completely earned. Well, come back sometime later in the video where I talk about TV shows. And here it is, the final day of this long video. If you've made it this far into the video, please go into the comments. So really, we're only going to talk about TV shows. I debated if I would have quick thoughts on games again, and not really. I think I kind of covered mostly what I want to cover. There's something I will talk about at the end, though. Just, you'll see. I just want to get some complicated thoughts out. So here's a funny thing. Because I already talked about Dragon Ball Z, the Buu Saga, all of the TV shows came from HBO Max. The reason why me and so many people are really disappointed in what is going on behind the scenes at HBO Max is because even after those things, it's still the best streaming service. So it would be so heartbreaking if these decisions make it no longer the best one. I already went through this with Verve. I don't want to go through it again only a couple years later. That my favorite streaming service just gets gutted beyond all recognition. Let's talk about a new show, or the returning season of a newer show. So last year it was the newest thing on this list. No, actually it isn't. I lied just now. Okay, Jellystone. I'm talking about Jellystone. Jellystone originally caught my attention the same way it did for most people. You know, I saw the social media highlights, and like most people, I wasn't actually put off by the art style, but I was like, huh, this could prove itself, but it's definitely odd, is the best I can say. And then, you know, you got a few more clips from the people working on the show, and it's like, hey, this looks pretty funny, actually. Now, the creator of this show is the same creator behind Chowder, and also Harvey Beaks. Although I never got around to Harvey Beaks, I have seen Chowder. I don't know how controversial this hot take is going to be. I like Jellystone a lot more than I liked Chowder. It's weird. It seems like Gen Z really thinks Chowder is like this phenomenal gold standard of comedy show that nothing else from Cartoon Network could ever really compete. And there are shows from my childhood from Cartoon Network I hold up to those exact same standards, so I get it. I won't lie, Chowder is not one of my favorite Cartoon Network shows by a long shot. Honestly, the lineup from around that same time, I was more into Flapjack, and I was more into Camp Lazlo, and definitely more into Ben 10. Chowder was on my radar. Chowder, I've gone back to. Chowder is good. It's a good show. A lot of the time, it's an average show, and sometimes the jokes can be, like, really stand above it. Also, I think sometimes the jokes can be kind of bland. Like, I love how when people bring up, like, fourth wall jokes really aren't as good as they could be. They're so overused. Now look at Chowder and how Chowder did it. And then I watch that clip and I don't laugh. Humor's subjective. So I totally get why some people would love Chowder so much. And I think Chowder is a good show. A really well-made show. I like Jellystone way more, even though I recognize a lot of what works with it is the stuff that they were doing in Chowder. I just think these new interpretations of these old Hanna-Barbera characters are really good. I mean, I'm even going to say it. I think turning Augie Doggie into Daddy Doggie's daughter somehow makes that relationship work so much better. They have so much more to work with somehow. And it doesn't necessarily need to work that way, they just would have needed better writing back when they originally created Augie Doggie and Daddy Doggie. But it is impossible now to not look at Jellystone and go, wow, Daddy Doggie's actually an interesting character now, as is Augie Doggie. I really like, the voice work is impeccable because they're all doing impressions and their own takes at the exact same time. Obviously, the impression bit is a bit lost, like Jabberjaw no longer sounds like Curly, which is fine. That's a little bit so outdated, you don't need to do that. But Huckleberry Hound sounds a lot like Huckleberry Hound while still being a take on Huckleberry Hound. Personally, I love the voice used for Snagglepuss. I think Dana Schneider, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Dana Schneider, does fantastic work at sounding like a great Snagglepuss impression while also having some layers to it. I love that voice, actually. Some of the plots in the episodes get really wild and wacky. I really love where it goes. It devolves into chaos immediately, and I think it's kind of great. As someone who can recognize nearly all, in some cases, all of these characters, I really like what Jellystone does. I thought about actually making a quick video about it a while ago, and I scrapped that so many times, so I kind of had to talk about Jellystone. If you have HBO Max and you haven't checked out Jellystone, or if it probably did end up airing on Cartoon Network like I heard it was going to, if for some reason you're paying the absorbent fees of cable, go check it out there. What are people talking about when they say the streaming services, there's so many of them, it's like cable looks cheaper now. Have you seen what cable charges every month? The streaming services are still better. I'm sorry. It's not as great as it was in the original pioneering days of streaming, but like, streaming is still the best way to watch television. The only way to watch television as far as I'm concerned. And I mostly watch internet videos than I do TV. Okay, so remember when I said I lied, and there was actually a newer show on my list. Would you believe that newer show is Smiling Friends?
I do hope that Shrimpina likes my cool new attire.
Look, I told you, man, you need to get over her, okay? There's plenty more fish in the sea.
How do I look, yellow man?
Smiling Friends really is a lot more of what I like to see with adult animation, and I don't mean I want animated shows to copy what Smiling Friends doing. No, that'd be like saying I'm so glad so many adult shows are copying Rick and Morty. Adult sitcoms, adult animated shows just love copying what the most popular one is doing, and it means that the creativity is kind of dying, and that's always been the case. You know, The Simpsons started the adult animated sitcom renaissance, and then everyone decided to copy them, even though The Simpsons themselves was just, hey, remember the Flintstones? Let's admit that our stuff is all ages, like the Flintstones kind of did. I know, same thing, kinda, not really, sorta. Who cares? You understand my point. But Smiling Friends is a specific breed of cynicism, but a little bit of optimism. The kind of like down-to-earth kind of feel that it has, despite its pastel art style. There's a lot to like about Smiling Friends. I mean, I binged like all of it in like 1 or 2 sittings. It is a fantastic show. I will say, I didn't get around to the pilot like the same time everyone else did. I got around to the pilot when all the episodes were up. And I don't love the pilot. I think the pilot showcases some potential, and like a lot of pilots, try to do too many things at once just to kind of get your bases of like, oh, the show can also be like this, the show could also be like this. It's rare to find a great pilot, is all I'm saying. Even the best shows in the world tend to have kind of mediocre pilots. And Smiling Friends is fantastic. It figured out what it wants to do episode by episode, and they're not long, they're all 11 minutes a pop, and I don't think they should be any longer than that. I think the brisk pace of the humor, that still has time for like whatever else it wants to do. And I saw someone else put this great. I'm not going to say exactly what the moment was because it's the ending of an episode, but there's a moment where there's an obvious cynical joke that would have just involved killing a character. And any other adult sitcom, be it Rick and Morty, be it Family Guy, even The Simpsons is guilty of this, and especially South Park. I like South Park, but even South Park is guilty of this. Would have just killed that character and be like, oh, that sucks. End of episode. And Smiling Friends refused to do that. Smiling Friends refused to do that. And it made that episode all the more better. Smiling Friends, it's kind of spitting in the face of what a lot of animated adult sitcoms have become over the years, just by bothering to be a creative and funny show. It is nice to have something this fresh in a sea of stuff that where even the good examples are starting to become a bit stale. But everyone else has said that already. That's why I'm struggling to find new things to say. You probably already know that you like Smiling Friends if you're an internet watcher. It's made by internet people. But yeah, Smiling Friends, good show. Very entertaining. So, Smiling Friends made me remember, oh yeah, I've got like all of Adult Swim's catalog on HBO Max, or like almost all of it, and there were shows I really had to catch up on. I think I watched a little bit more Harvey Attorney, Birdman, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, that's the actual name of the show, not Harvey Attorney. And you know, that show's so good. I finally watched a little bit of C-Lab 2021, that's pretty good. Oh, I finally watched some Tim and Eric. I didn't realize I'd be a Tim and Eric fan. Tim and Eric I was really happy with. But the thing that really stuck out to me was I finally caught up with a show I'd been meaning to for a while, because I'd only seen seasons 1 and 2. And season 1 I was a real big fan of. Season 2 was bringing some interesting concepts, but I guess just the stinger in episode 1 was so good it made season 2 feel like something was lacking. However, I think you'll already figure out how happy I was season 3 onward when I tell you that the show I caught up with was The Venture Brothers. Season 3 of The Venture Brothers basically says, remember that stinger in season 1? Here's a better one. It is amazing how much that show changes after season 3. Like, as someone who... I've never seen Johnny Quest, but I'm aware of what Johnny Quest is. So I am close enough aware to where the parody is that I got the joke. And I was really happy with that show. I mean, again, Season 1 is mostly just a Johnny Quest parody, in all seriousness. Season 2 starts dabbling with, you know, the Guild of Calamitous Intent and the rulings of that. I mean, Phantom Limb kind of becomes the bad guy in that season for a while. Season 3, though, is where they really kind of attempt to go into it harder. And then Season 4 onward, it is almost an entirely different show, while still feeling completely natural. I remember even thinking, hey, when I originally watched Venture Brothers, I watched all of Season 1 when this was really good, waited quite a while, and then watched all of Season 2. I figured that would happen. I would do that again because I just thought that was the right viewing experience. But then after I watched all of Season 3, I was like, well, I should at least check out a little bit of Season 4 to see where this is going. And then about like a week or so later, I'd seen all the way through the end of Season 7. I have a soft spot for the Boondocks, if we're talking Adult Swim shows. It is probably still my favorite Adult Swim show, just because it's the one that got me into watching more Adult Swim. Unless you want to count Futurama, because I did discover Futurama through Adult Swim. But if you have to, but oh my gosh, I feel like I can't deny that probably the best thing created by Adult Swim is the Venture Brothers. The world and characters that they create for that show, and just the lore and the backstories, and how everything ties together. I remember even reading before how, when the creators were actually asked, hey, how do you tie all this stuff together? And their honest answer was, well, we kind of just happen to remember stuff while we're writing and put it in. And I remember thinking how impressive that was, and how like even people like, you know, Chris Carter, the X-Files guy, had to like plan all this stuff out in advance just so all this stuff tied together. And originally I thought it's so impressive how these guys can just do it just by happening to remember. The more I watched Venture Brothers, the more I realized these guys were huge comic book fans, and that kind of answered it for me. Because comic book fans remember stuff that happens in comic books way more than the comic book writers do. If you need anybody to remember the stuff no one else remembers happening, it's diehard comic book fans. Season 7 is not my favorite one, though, I won't lie. But then again, I think that's also because, and I hope I'm not forgetting it, the Season 6 just was so good and ended so well. Like, all this in Gargantua 2 is just truly fantastic television. And it just means anything following it can't hold up to it. And again, maybe I'm remembering wrong. Maybe that was the end of Season 5. Because it all would have become a blur, and Season 7 was a shorter season anyway, so it's a little bit too hard to combine it into Season 6. And I'll tell you though, since there was an actual cliffhanger at the end of Season 7, and not just a cliffhanger, the kind of cliffhanger where you could tell the writers were admitting we're actually very close to the end. It's one of those specific cliffhangers, like, as many of your answers are about to be answered, as many of our plot lines are about to end soon, and then you get canceled anyway. I gotta say, if that movie that I've heard about never comes to fruition, I think Zaslav has crossed the event horizon of evil. I cannot, even with how fun and creative and zany Adult Swim content tends to be, it is amazing that they managed this. It's truly one of the best television shows in a very long time, and it's a long runner. It's not that new. It's amazing how fantastic it still is, and it deserves to be remembered as one of the greatest, if not one of the greatest animated shows, one of the greatest animated shows aimed at adults. And while sure, that sounds like a very low bar, let's remember the other ones that are, you know, in that club and how great some of those are. Yeah, just Venture Brothers, man. It is spectacular how well everything pays off, including stuff you probably assumed they would never mention again. So our last one is another newer running show that I'd seen some before and was finally catching up with. I'm not actually even done watching all these episodes. There's just so many of them, because that's how they were able to film them. If you aren't watching the reboot for Whose Line Is It Anyway, you are genuinely missing out on one of the best reboots, just plain ever.
I'm sorry, one second. So this is the other part of the conversation. We're in a parking lot at CBS Studios waiting for our VIP entrance into Whose Line Is It Anyway taping. Is that still a show? Yeah. This is your friend Justine? Oh, your sister. Well, she's being FaceTimed right about now. Oh, wait a second, we gotta put her Wi-Fi on. Talking about is that still a show? I'll show you a damn is that still a show.
A lot of reboots either miss the point or they rely too heavily on what they did before. You know, when it comes to, I mean, even some, you know, shows getting canceled and then not canceled have this problem when it's the exact same staff working on it. Let's take, we were just talking about adult animation, let's take Family Guy and Futurama. What many people loved about very early Family Guy and got them to buy the DVDs and watch it late on Adult Swim, which convinced Fox to renew the license, you know, Family Guy became a different show after that. And it's kind of fascinating to see how that still worked out for them, because you basically brought back a completely different show based on the sudden late-term success of an old show. And then you also get Futurama, which, you know, people fight over, like, oh, what was the best? The Fox era, the direct-to-DVD movie era, or the Comedy Central era? And as someone who's been online for a while, the Comedy Central era used to not be in that conversation. People were not fond of the Comedy Central reboot, relaunch, whatever you want to call it, of Futurama. But now people are really fond of it. I'll be a hipster. I always liked the Comedy Central Futurama stuff. I think a lot of the strongest episodes are in the Fox era, but I think there's so much good in the Comedy Central era. And even if some jokes feel very Comedy Central, if that makes any sense, that's still very good. What's interesting about the reboot for Whose Line Is It Anyway is that it kind of nails everything the old show did, and it is just amazing how it does. You know, you still have Wayne Brady and Colin Mockery and Ryan Stiles in nearly every episode. For once, sometimes one of them is busy. You know, Wayne does have hosting duties with Let's Make a Deal, so that makes a bit more sense. Ryan was not in an episode one time, and I was surprised by that, because I'm pretty sure Ryan's been around since the UK version of the show. Speaking of, the UK version needs to be easy to watch legally over here in America. I'm sure it is not the version I would prefer, but considering how much I love the original American version and this reboot American version, just as much, sometimes better, I would love to see more of the UK version. So I feel like it's no longer controversial to talk about how Aisha Tyler does over Drew Carey. There wasn't, like, stink about it, like, you know, Drew obviously didn't want to come back and was on The Price is Right. I would also turn down Whose Line Is It Anyway for The Price is Right, to be honest. I like one show better. I understand which show probably is a better gig. And Aisha is a little bit rough in the very early seasons, because I even went back to the first season of the reboot just to, like, remember it. And Aisha gets a little bit rough. Around season 3, maybe even in season 2, she starts joining in the games more. She starts talking more, and there are plenty of times, especially late into the seasons, where she comes across as a better host than Drew did. And I love Drew Carey, do not get me wrong. But I mean, Drew will even admit he wasn't the world's best improviser. And honestly, he was mostly just kind of there sometimes just for the cast to shit on him. But Aisha, like, really joins in the games more, is a lot more vocal. It is amazing how good she is as a host. And I also think something that this reboot kind of does do better than the original US version. I edited out a cough, that's why there's a jump cut, even though it would sound like one sentence when I get back to you, as long as I don't leave this part in too. Is that I think the rotating cast of 4 seats consistently is better. I'm a Kathy Greenwood apologist. That does not mean I can't tell sometimes she's a little bit too nervous, a little bit not sure what to say in the scenes. I think she's better than YouTube comments make her out to be, but I don't think she's a perfect seat. It's just I actually enjoy when she's on, like, oh cool, Kathy Greenwood. I preferred her over some people like, you're gonna get mad at me for this, I preferred her over Chip Eston. That said, I never have a fourth seat problem in this reboot. No matter who is in the fourth seat, I know it's going to be a good time. And that even includes Chip Eston, who actually comes back a couple times in this reboot. He now goes by Charles, apparently, but it's still Chip Eston. And to be honest, age has made him a better comedian, because he's a lot less loud, and that was my big problem. Sometimes he kind of felt like loud is funny, and it's like, yeah, Doug Walker thinks that too. To be fair, I'd actually not mind seeing Doug Walker do an improv thing. A long time ago, we actually did some improv at like a convention or something, and I remember watching that video a couple times. Doug is everything people make him out to be, and that also includes the people who say, sometimes he is funny. But yeah, and plus, these new four-seaters, you know, it's hard to imagine the show now without Gary Anthony Williams sometimes popping up, without Keegan-Michael Key sometimes popping up. And you know what? Remember Jeff Davis? You probably remember Jeff Davis, the guy who showed up once, maybe twice, but I think once, in the original US run, and this was like one of their best guys ever. Why'd they never ask him back? He's back a lot in the reboot. Enough so, I don't consider him an original cast member. I consider him part of the reboot cast. Oh, and if you do watch a lot of Let's Make a Deal, you'll know that Wayne has a co-host, Jonathan Mangum. He's also a recurring four seats. And that guy's good. He's very physical with his comedy, but in a way that works. He's surprisingly funny. This cast all works so good together. So there's two things. One which I wouldn't be surprised is controversial, and one thing I know is controversial. There are a couple of new games, and a lot of them feel a definite case of we're trying to be more modern. Like there's a game where they borrow some cell phones from audience members and read off the text messages as their lines. It's basically a reworking of that game where, you know, Colin, it was usually Colin, would be on, and there'd be two guys next to him, and they were only allowed 2 lines. It feels like an updated version of that game. And again, it sounds like, oh, we're trying to be hip and modern. But honestly, just the sheer random numbers behind that. Because those text messages have ranged from oddly fitting to I don't think context would make this sentence make any sense. And it is a surprisingly good game. They stopped doing it for a little bit, but now they've brought that game back into the later seasons, and I was actually disappointed when I stopped seeing it. It's like, man, that's the best of their new games. There's also one where they go backstage and they've painted a floor like a wall and put like some stuff there. It definitely looks like they stopped doing it because it's way too physical, but it was a really funny one. There's one where they have a suitcase and there's just a prop in there, which, yes, prop comedy can be pretty cheap. These guys know how to make that stuff work. I think all the new games have been fit very well, and yes, I know a lot of them feel like they're there to keep the show from feeling too old. But at the same time, again, some are just updated older games, and I think when they work, they're fantastic, and some of them just always work. Okay, so another controversial bit. When the show was first greenlit, it was actually explicitly stated in the contract, well, 2 things were stated. 1, no more hoedowns. And you know what? I actually don't miss them. The more I watch episodes without hoedowns, the more I realize they weren't kidding, they hated the hoedowns. Because trying to go back to those older episodes where they did the hoedowns, I noticed the grunts and the sighs really weren't them joking. You can kind of tell. But from people who are jokesters all the time, you can kind of tell, oh, they mean it this time. They're not happy. Plus, Irish Drinking Song was always the better version of Hoedown, and we need to start accepting that. But the other one was that they needed to have celebrity guest stars every single episode to help pay the bills. And as someone who's been watching a lot of these, it's even a bit cheaper than that because all the celebrity guest stars just happen to be people from a new CW show. CW being the network that picked up the reboot. So it's just more self-advertising. That said, some of them are just kind of meh. Do they actually detract from the episode? No, they're just kind of there. And usually those ones, they could kind of tell in advance because they just have Wayne sing to them. Which is fine. I preferred it when it was an audience member. Something about that felt a bit more genuine. Probably because it was. But it's fine. If that's what got us these new episodes, which really are just as good, if not better, than the old ones, I will take it. Then you get stuff that it's people you never expect. And I'm going to say it straight up. Whenever it's a sports player or a boy band member, you're in for some of the best celebrities they've ever had on there, and I do not know why. Somehow the sports players are so ready to get in, to banter off everybody else, to come up with these fantastic, funny ideas. I can't believe it. An NSYNC member was on and he was fantastic. It's the people you don't expect. There is so much to love about this reboot. It understands everything great from the original, probably because a lot of the cast is the same. And it's willing to get rid of the stuff that didn't and update some stuff that still works. I would not be surprised if the more I keep on with this, I might like it more. Just hands down than the original. And Whose Line is in my top 5 for favorite shows. I can't stress this enough. If you're just one of those like reboots are never good, I don't think I'll pick this one. Do try to give this one a chance, and maybe start with like season 4 or 5. Because you will probably be surprised just how well everything connects again.
Christine, hey, look!
Show's still on!
It's still a show! It's still a show!
So we got one thing to talk about, because I wanted to really like this thing, and it started to come across as something I'd really like. Remember a few months ago, High on Life came out? It was a first-person shooter where your guns talk to you, and one of the guns is now someone we probably don't want to talk about anymore. But regardless of that, I remember being kind of interested in the game and finding out it'd be on Game Pass, which at that time I was considering resubscribing to Game Pass anyway. Well, not considering, I knew I would at some point, so that was kind of cool. After I started working at DualShockers, it's like, oh cool, I can write some guides for that. And I won't lie, those have been some of my most interesting guides to write, because I actually, not to throw shade, I got guides for all of the Luglocks collectibles before a lot of the other gaming sites did. I was one of, if not the first, when it comes to the gaming sites, and that's great. I can't help with that. Even though, admittedly, I'm not even the biggest fan of those guides for one specific reason. When it comes to collectibles, I like it when I can show pictures of the map, so that way you guys know I'm pinpointing exactly. High on Life doesn't have that, which sucks for the jungle levels, because not only do they all look exactly the same, but some of the areas overlap in ways you wouldn't expect, like not even a foot is you're in a different space. It's annoying. There's one spot where a chest is on top of another chest and they're counted as 2 separate areas. That was obnoxious. But that's also why I took pictures of the chests before I opened them, to hope that the color coding would help. If anyone has a problem with those guides, I wouldn't blame them. I'm not super happy with how they turned out, but I blame the game more than me. I know that sounds arrogant, but I did the best with what the game gave me as an option. And honestly, that's kind of how I would review the game. It gave me its best for what it had. The early bits of the game I actually was really fond of. The gun combat feels really good and very unique. It's very gimmicky in a good way. A lot of the humor in the very beginning is pretty funny. The problem is... Well, no, actually, scratch that for a second. I also like the plot a lot. The premise is intriguing and very unique. I also do like the beginning of a lot of the characters. I like the main, like Jean Zaruthian and your sister whose name I forget. There's actually a lot done with them that actually feels pretty good. And there's even dialogue choices which encourage replay. High on Life for a while felt like the kind of game I used to buy back when I was in college, where it would be unique and different and fresh, and maybe not the most polished thing in the world, but the kind of game I would so enjoy playing the entire time. And it would become one of two things. A game I would, replay again, like, quite a bit, or replay once because I did not get all the achievements in the first run, and so I'd have to go do it again. Because I've always been a kind of an achievement and trophy person. Personally, though, 100% completion does not always mean I love the game. If it's something like on the Switch, which has no achievement system, that usually means I really loved the game. When it comes to trophies and achievements, sometimes it means I really loved the game. Sometimes it means I enjoyed or even didn't enjoy the game, and I just want to convince my brain there was no reason to ever come back to it. You got all the achievements. You've proven there's no reason to come back. And High on Life started feeling like one of those ones after a while. Remember how I said the game was funny at first? The game only has so many types of jokes, and so it starts running those into the ground really quickly. Which is a shame, because some stuff did still catch me later on. Like, I can't lie, I am this childish when one alien in a trench coat flagged me down for something, and I ran over, and he said loudly, "Do you want to buy alien cum?" I laughed at that. I thought that was really funny. Enough so that I bought the alien cum. Which turned out as an achievement. If you carry that thing until the end of the game, you have an achievement. And I will also say, I still think the gun combat was pretty good. I did constantly switch up the guns. Not just for banter, because Kenny talks the most. He becomes sympathetic near the end of the game, but because he constantly still is mouthy and rude, for no reason, sometimes just to break the fourth wall to tell you, hey, just remember, this is just a fucking video game, grow up, shut up. It's like, how am I supposed to feel bad for you? You're so consistently annoying, I want you to shut up. The game loves this kind of humor. Just swearing for the sake of swearing, because it's funny. And, hey, this is just a video game, remember this is just a video game, remember this is just a video game, and that gets sickening after a while. It works for a while, but if you cannot change up your type of humor, it eventually feels stale, even if it was a humor you were gelling with. I also hate the price tag for this game. Now, the price tag of it being on Game Pass, that's a pretty great price tag. I would not have bought this game at $60, and I'm going to tell you, it is not worth $60. At least it ain't 70, but it isn't worth 60. This feels like the kind of game that would have been worth 40. So something like Maneater. I really loved Maneater, but I also think one of the reasons I loved Maneater was because it does not feel like a $50 or $60 game. It feels like a fun $40 game with so much more content than you might think, with stuff polished enough. And I don't know, I know game pricing is stupid and dumb, but after a while you start recognizing some patterns, and High on Life feels like a $40 game. Speaking of $40 games, what makes High on Life more embarrassing now is there's now a $30 game called Hi-Fi Rush. And you might be thinking, other than the fact that Hi is used twice and not even spelled the right way, what do they got in common? Both of them remind me of, like, mid-era PS3 360 games, where creatives were just trying something new and creative and being colorful and having these brand new, interesting mechanics. Sometimes you'd use once and never again. And I think Hi-Fi Rush does it excellently. That it made me even like High on Life less. Because there were things about High on Life that I liked purely because it reminded me of those older days. Then I get to Hi-Fi Rush just a month later and go, oh, never mind. This is what I was thinking of when it came to those kind of games. I don't entirely want to poo on High on Life, because honestly, I think there's a lot good there. And I don't want to be mean by this. I think a lot of what doesn't work is just the kind of trademark style stamp of squanch games. I don't watch too much Rick and Morty, although I have, and I enjoyed Rick and Morty for what it was. But it's the kind of humor that relies so much on repetition and the same kind of basic ideas, you know, just talking humor-wise, that it will get grating or boring, and I don't know which is worse. To be back on positive, I really do like the actual linear story stuff. I think the story is still very fun and creative in ways that get me interested. The dialogue options made me go, I do wonder what will happen when I come back to this later. If I play it again, and because I missed some achievements, I probably will. But I don't entirely think this game is completely worth its salt, and I am afraid that the problem lies with how they wanted to make the game, which sounds so insulting. So, when it comes to Squanch Games, I don't know the next time I'll play one of their games. It's going to be I have to wait to see what reviews say, unless it's for work, unless, like High on Life, it happens to fall into my lap with easy access, and so I can have some articles to write. I don't really know. Because for everything I really liked about the game, it kept wanting to throw that away. Like, again, I liked the story stuff, but it would love to pause that story stuff just to say fuck. And just to do another fourth wall joke. And after a while, I just sit there going, if you could have done anything else besides what you decided needed to be here in this scene, you would have made something I liked a lot more. That's why it wasn't on the top 10. In fact, if I had decided to only do newer games, it would have been hard to debate if it was better than Scarlet, because I admitted I thought Scarlet was mid. I played Scarlet a lot more. And then again, Hi-Fi Rush wasn't out when I first played High on Life, and I cannot help but compare those two games that really have almost nothing in common. Speaking of nothing in common with High on Life, hey, buy my books. This is the artwork I drew for the covers. I can show these to like everybody now. I showed them to my dad because he's an artist, and so I wanted his professional artist opinion. And for some reason, he thought I also wanted him to like print them. So you should go buy these. They're affordable.